the biggest threats to democracy and in particular media freedom in Hong Kong. Well, we were founded as a direct response to the declining press freedom situation in the city. Hong Kong is meant to be a press freedom hub, a bastion of press freedom in Asia, the one place in, I guess, Greater China that press freedom is protected, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And yet we have seen in recent years a gradual erosion, death by a thousand cuts, if you will, a slow boiling frog of these civil liberties. Maybe those analogies are becoming less relevant when things are declining so fast now. Whether it be self-censorship, attacks on journalists, pro-Beijing entities buying out newspapers here, ownership issues, whereby much of the media here is either owned by people who have business interests in the mainland, owned by the Chinese Communist Party. We're trying to be an antidote to that because there's not many places to go basically in English language media in Hong Kong where you can tell the story of what's happening in the city to the rest of the world. And what is going on in Hong Kong is an important story because how China treats Hong Kong and its promises that it's made to maintain its freedoms and civil liberties is a lesson for the world in terms of how Beijing respects these treaties that it gets into with other countries. And what it's doing here in terms of eroding civil liberties and amid rising censorship is what we may see in other parts of the world. And certainly we're already seeing the effects on what partnerships with China mean around Southeast Asia and other Belt and Road states, if you will. So it's a pretty important story, the protests over the last year, which I would say are still going on, despite being in somewhat hibernation, if you will, due to the coronavirus. But there is still unrest. Just in the last hour, my reporters have witnessed tear gas and arrests up in one of the districts in Hong Kong, so it's still happening. As for the long-term trends with regards to press freedom here, the Communist Party and the local government are going to want to ensure that the kind of unrest and protests that we've been seeing over the last year and the 5 demands of the protests are not going to happen again, basically. And you know, the free media here, the fact that people can live stream, see on Telegram what's going on, organize themselves through forums and on social media. I imagine we may see some kind of draconian measures to prevent that kind of thing happening again. I wouldn't be surprised if we see mainland style censorship at some time in the future, although this is meant to be an international finance hub. You know, the second freest economy in the world now. So that is always a concern for us, let alone just in the last week, we've been told that the US journalists that are being thrown out of China in a tit-for-tat dispute with Washington, they are not going to be allowed to find work as journalists in Hong Kong. And that's huge because the basic law, the mini constitution here, guarantees the right to have any job you want. It guarantees press freedom and it guarantees Hong Kong can make its own immigration policies. So that's a concern that's come up just in the last week. And just in the last year or two, we have seen a first case of a Western journalist being thrown out of Hong Kong. So bit by bit, we are seeing free expression, press freedom being dismantled in this once free city, and it's a very sad political tale. That we are charting as a news outlet, 16,000 news stories in 5 years, and yeah, we've come out of the protests as sort of semi-war reporters, I suppose. People in Poland will have a pretty recent memory of life under a communist regime, and the sort of censorship and self-censorship that comes with that. And the messages of solidarity that the protesters in Hong Kong have seen through the human chain events that they've been doing, and some of the artwork and some of the protests over in Europe, including in Poland, I think have been quite heartening to the movement here. And whenever we report on them, as we do occasionally, sharing photos from Poland and beyond, they get a lot of traction because people really do appreciate that folks, tuned into what was happening here. But certainly looking at those protests and how, if they'd have happened in the mainland, it would have been very difficult to know what was going on. And looking at the coronavirus issue now, where you see the issue of the beginning of that virus and how authoritarianism and censorship meant that there was no mechanism for the whistleblower, the Dr. Lee, who ended up dying from the virus, to be able to raise the alarm. I think in these circumstances and the lessons from the last 12 months, it's that press freedom is ever more important, and especially in Hong Kong, where there is no democracy, it's very important to have that valve, that check on power, to be a voice of the voiceless, and all of these traditional sort of tropes that we associate with journalism, because there is no mechanism for removing people in power through the ballot box. So we need to keep them in check in a different way, and that's why there is added importance, I think, on the media and press freedom in cities like ours. And I think Polish people, historically will be familiar with that.